Dr. Sarah Chen was checking the health records of 3 injured space wolves when the emergency call came through. The communication device on her desk flashed red 3 times, which meant only one thing: a code black emergency. She had never seen a code black in her 5 years working at the Outer Rim Veterinary Station. "Dr. Chen, this is Commander Vex from the Galactic Health Authority," said a deep voice through the speaker. The translator made the alien words sound flat and emotionless. "We need you on the medical ship Mercy's Hope immediately. We have a situation that requires your specific skills." Sarah frowned as she looked at the holographic image of a tall, blue-skinned Centauri officer. "What kind of situation, Commander?" "A smuggling ship was stopped 3 days ago near the Kepler station. Inside, we found 200 cubs from 12 different species. All of them are sick with something our doctors cannot identify or treat properly. 30 cubs have already died." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had heard stories about smugglers who stole young animals from their home planets to sell them as exotic pets. The conditions were always terrible, and many died before reaching their destination. "What species are we talking about?" she asked, already reaching for her emergency medical kit. "Velthian cubs, young Thrikari, Centauri infants, Corvin pups, and 8 other species. The disease affects each species differently. Some have seizures, others cannot move, and some are shutting down completely. Our medical team is doing their best, but they are trained to work with only 1 or 2 species each. This is beyond their experience," Sarah understood immediately. Most alien doctors specialized in treating only their own species or closely related ones. The idea of treating multiple different alien species at the same time was almost unheard of. But Sarah was different. On Earth, veterinarians had to understand hundreds of different animal species. She had treated everything from tiny birds to massive elephants during her training. "I'll be there in 6 hours," she said, already packing her equipment. The transport ship that picked her up was fast, but the journey felt like forever. Sarah spent the time reading every file she could find about the 12 species aboard the quarantine ship. Some information was familiar to her, but other species were completely new. She made notes about their basic biology, what they ate, how their bodies worked, and what medicines might be dangerous for them. When the transport finally docked with Mercy's Hope, Sarah was surprised by how big the medical ship was. It was 3 times larger than her research station, with white corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Emergency lights flashed along the walls, and she could hear announcements in different alien languages echoing through the halls. Commander Vex met her at the airlock. Up close, the Centauri officer looked tired and worried. His usually bright blue skin had turned a pale gray color, which Sarah knew was a sign of stress in his species. "Dr. Chen, thank you for coming so quickly. Dr. Haranth will show you around. He is our chief medical officer, and he has been working non-stop since the cubs arrived." Dr. Haranth was also a Centauri, but older than the commander. His forearms moved constantly as he talked, which showed how nervous he was. "Dr. Chen, I must be honest with you. We are losing this battle. Every hour more cubs get worse. We have tried everything we know, but nothing works for all of them." As they walked through the ship, Sarah could see the chaos everywhere. Medical staff ran between rooms carrying equipment and medicines. She could hear crying and strange sounds coming from behind closed doors. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something else. The smell of fear and sickness. "Show me the cubs," Sarah said simply. The first quarantine room they entered made Sarah's heart break. 20 small creatures lay in individual medical pods, each one a different species. Some looked like Earth animals she knew. One reminded her of a fox, another looked like a small bear. Others were completely alien, with features she had never seen before. "We keep each species separate," Dr. Haranth explained. "It is the safest way to prevent the disease from spreading between different biological systems." Sarah walked slowly between the pods, looking carefully at each sick cub. A small Velthian with silver fur was shaking uncontrollably. Next to it, a young Thrikari with golden scales was completely still, barely breathing. Across the room, 3 Corvin pups with soft blue fur were crying weakly. "What treatments are you using?" Sarah asked. "Each species gets the standard treatment for their biology," Dr. Haranth said, showing her a data pad. "The Velthians get neural stabilizers. The Thrikari get respiratory support. The Corvins get immune boosters. But nothing is working like it should." Sarah studied the treatment list and frowned. Each species was being treated completely separately, as if they had different diseases. But as she looked at the cubs, she started to see something the other doctors had missed. Dr. Haranth, has anyone considered that this might not be 12 different diseases? The alien doctor's four eyes blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Each species shows different symptoms. It must be affecting their biology in species-specific ways. Sarah knelt down next to the pod holding the small Velthian cub. Its silver fur was dull and its breathing was fast and shallow. But when she looked closely, she could see the same look in its eyes that she had seen in the other cubs. Not just physical pain, but deep fear and sadness. On Earth, we learned something important about treating sick animals, Sarah said, still looking at the cub. Sometimes what looks like different diseases is really the same problem showing up in different ways. These cubs have all been through terrible trauma. They were taken from their families, kept in horrible conditions, and now they are alone and scared. But the biological symptoms are completely different, Dr. Haranth insisted. Sarah stood up and looked around the room again. What if the disease is the same, but it attacks each species where they are weakest? Stress and fear can make any illness much worse. These cubs are not just sick in their bodies. They are sick in their hearts, too. She walked to another pod where a young creature with purple fur and 6 legs was lying motionless. When Sarah put her hand gently on the pod, the cub's eyes opened slightly and looked at her. "I need to see all the quarantine areas," Sarah said, "and I need complete medical records for every cub, including what they were like when they first arrived." As they continued the tour, Sarah saw the same pattern in every room. Cubs separated by species, treated with different medicines, getting worse despite the best efforts of skilled doctors. But in every room, she also saw the same thing: young creatures who were scared, alone, and missing their families. By the time they finished looking at all 200 cubs, Sarah's mind was racing with ideas. She had seen enough sick animals in her career to recognize when the problem was bigger than just medicine and surgery. "Dr. Haranth," she said as they returned to the main medical bay, "I think I know what we need to do differently, but it's going to require changing almost everything about how you're treating these cubs." The alien doctor looked at her with hope and worry at the same time. "What do you propose?" Sarah took a deep breath. "First, we stop thinking of this as 12 separate problems. Second, we start treating not just their bodies but their emotional trauma too. And third, we let them help heal each other." Dr. Haranth's forearm stopped moving completely. "I do not understand." "You will," Sarah said, already planning her next steps. "But first I need to save the ones who are closest to dying. How many cubs are in critical condition right now?" 15, maybe 20, Dr. Haranth said quietly. Sarah nodded and rolled up her sleeves. "Then we better get started." Sarah spent her first night aboard Mercy's Hope, moving from room to room, studying each sick cub carefully, while the alien medical staff followed their normal sleep schedules. She worked through the darkness with only emergency lighting to guide her. Her portable scanner beeped softly as she recorded vital signs, behavior patterns, and symptoms. What she discovered made her more certain about her theory. In quarantine room 7, a small Corvan pup with blue fur showed the same rapid eye movements during sleep that she had seen in traumatized Earth animals. In room 12, 3 different species all had elevated stress hormones despite being given different medicines. Most telling of all, the cubs that had been found together in the same cage on the smuggling ship showed identical progression patterns, even though they were completely different species. By morning, Sarah had filled 2 data pads with notes. When Dr. Haranth found her in the medical lab, she was comparing blood samples under a microscope. "Dr. Chen, you have been awake all night," the Centauri doctor said, his forearms carrying steaming cups of different beverages. "You must rest." "I'll rest when they're all better," Sarah replied without looking up from the microscope. "Look at this." Dr. Haranth set down the drinks and peered into the scope. "What am I looking at?" "Blood samples from 6 different species. See those markers there? That's not species-specific immune response. That's a universal stress reaction. Every single cub has the same elevated levels, regardless of their biology." Sarah pulled up holographic charts that filled the air around them. "On Earth, we learned that animals from completely different families can react to trauma in surprisingly similar ways. A scared mouse and a scared elephant both release the same stress chemicals, just in different amounts." Dr. Haranth studied the data, his large eyes moving rapidly between the charts. "But our medical protocols are based on treating each species according to their specific needs." "And that's exactly the problem," Sarah said, standing up and stretching her sore back. "You're treating 12 different diseases when there's really only one." The pathogen is smart. It adapts to attack each species where their stress makes them most vulnerable. Sarah brought up another chart showing the progression of symptoms. Look, Velthians get seizures when they're stressed. Thrakari have breathing problems when they're scared. Corvins lose their appetite when they're sad. The disease isn't causing random symptoms. It's making each species' natural stress response much worse. Dr. Haranth was quiet for a long moment, studying the data. Finally, he said, "If you are correct, then our entire treatment approach is wrong." "Not wrong," Sarah corrected gently, "just incomplete. You're treating the symptoms perfectly, but you're not treating the cause. These cubs aren't just sick. They're heartbroken." Sarah led Dr. Haranth to quarantine room 4 where the most critical cases were kept. Through the transparent walls they could see 15 cubs from 8 different species, each in their own medical pod. "Watch their behavior," Sarah said quietly. "See how the Zentori infant keeps reaching toward the Corvin pup in the next pod? And look at how the young Thrakari's breathing improves when the medical staff are in the room, but gets worse when they leave." Dr. Haranth observed for several minutes. "They are seeking comfort from each other and from us." "Exactly. On Earth, we discovered that social support is just as important as medicine for healing trauma. These cubs were taken from their families, but they're trying to create new family bonds with whoever is nearby." Sarah pulled out her portable medical scanner and approached the pod containing a small creature that looked like a cross between a cat and a lizard. "This is a Draconis cub. According to your files, her species is supposed to be solitary and aggressive, but watch what happens when I get close." As Sarah approached, the little creature's eyes opened and she made a soft chirping sound. Her vital signs displayed on the pod's monitor immediately improved. Her heart rate is dropping, stress hormones are decreasing, and her brain activity is becoming more normal, Sarah explained. "She's not solitary at all, she's just scared and lonely." Dr. Haranth made notes on his datapad. "What do you propose we do with this information?" Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving on the ship. "We're going to try something that will probably horrify your infection control protocols. We're going to let them heal each other." Over the next few hours, Sarah worked with Dr. Haranth to identify cubs that might be compatible for social healing. She used her knowledge of Earth animal behavior to guess which alien species might comfort each other, rather than compete or fight. "The key is understanding what each species needs emotionally," Sarah explained as they prepared to move some cubs. "Corvin pups are pack animals. They need to be with others to feel safe. Velthians are naturally nurturing. Taking care of others helps them heal faster. Thrakari are hierarchical. They need to feel like they belong in a group structure." Dr. Haranth looked nervous as they prepared to break several quarantine protocols. "The administration will not approve of this." "Then we don't tell them until it works," Sarah said simply. "Sometimes saving lives means bending rules." They started with the most compatible pairs. A lonely Corvin pup was placed in a shared space with a young Velthian who had been showing maternal behaviors. Within minutes, both cubs were calmer and their vital signs improved. The next experiment was more daring. 3 cubs from different species who had been found in the same cage on the smuggling ship. Despite being a Thrakari, a Zentori, and a Draconis, they had clearly bonded during their ordeal. "If I'm right, they'll recognize each other and find comfort in being reunited," Sarah said as they carefully moved the 3 cubs into a larger shared medical space. The moment the 3 cubs could see each other, the change was dramatic. The Thrakari, who had been barely breathing, lifted his golden head and made a soft trilling sound. The Zentori infant, who had been unresponsive for hours, turned toward his cage mates with bright eyes. The little Draconis began purring, a sound that Sarah's scanner showed was actually helping to regulate the heart rates of all 3 cubs. Dr. Haranth stared at the medical readings in amazement. "Their recovery rates are improving faster than any medicine we have tried." "That's because we're finally treating the real problem," Sarah said, watching the 3 cubs comfort each other. "They're not just sick animals. They're traumatized children who need to feel safe and loved." Word of Sarah's unusual methods began to spread through the ship. Other medical staff started asking questions about the human veterinarian who was breaking quarantine rules and somehow getting better results than their advanced medical technology. Dr. Keth, a proud Thrakari surgeon with golden scales and sharp teeth, confronted Sarah in the corridor outside quarantine room 6. "I hear you think you can solve problems that our advanced civilization cannot," Dr. Keth said. his voice full of skepticism. You are from a primitive planet that has not even achieved faster than light travel. What could you possibly know that we do not? Sarah looked up at the tall alien surgeon calmly. I know that sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. Love, comfort, and family aren't primitive concepts. They're universal needs. Dr. Keth made a dismissive gesture. Emotions are not medicine, aren't they? Sarah asked. Follow me. She led the skeptical surgeon to the shared recovery space where the three bonded cubs were now playing weekly together. Their medical monitors showed vital signs that were better than any cubs being treated in individual isolation. These three cubs were dying 12 hours ago, Sarah said quietly. Now look at them. Dr. Keth studied the medical readings, his scaled face showing confusion and growing interest. How is this possible? Because healing isn't just about fixing broken bodies, Sarah explained. It's about fixing broken hearts, too. These cubs don't just need medicine. They need hope. As they watched, the little Draconis cub climbed carefully onto the back of the larger Thrakari cub, who purred gently in response. The Centauri infant reached out with tiny blue fingers to touch both of his friends. On Earth we have a saying, Sarah continued. Laughter is the best medicine, but I think comfort is even better. Dr. Keth was quiet for a long moment watching the three cubs support each other. Finally, he said, What else do you need to try this with more cubs? Sarah smiled. I need doctors who are willing to think beyond their training. Are you interested in learning something new? Dr. Keth straightened his shoulders and nodded. Show me what you need. By the fourth day, Sarah had not slept for more than 20 minutes at a time. She moved through the ship like someone in a dream, her body running on pure determination and medical stimulants. Her hands had developed a slight tremor, and dark circles under her eyes made her look almost ghostly. But she refused every suggestion to rest. Humans don't abandon the pack, she told Dr. Keth when he found her at 3 a.m, sitting on the floor next to a recovery area where she had fallen asleep while monitoring a critical patient. Dr. Keth had never heard this expression before, but something about it resonated deeply with his Thrakari understanding of loyalty and duty. He had begun working 20-hour shifts alongside Sarah, inspired by her complete dedication to the cubs. Dr. Chen, he said gently, helping her stand up from the floor. Even pack leaders need rest to stay strong for their family. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and checked the medical readings on her portable scanner. The Draconis cub in Group 7 is still showing elevated stress hormones, and the new Corvin pup who arrived yesterday isn't bonding with his assigned family group. I need to figure out what's wrong. Dr. Keth looked at the readings and frowned. Dr. Chen, these numbers look normal to me. Sarah stared at the scanner for a long moment, then blinked several times. You're right. I'm making mistakes. It was the first time since arriving on the ship that Sarah had admitted she might be reaching her limits. Dr. Keth guided her to a nearby chair and brought her some water. The cubs are not going anywhere, he said firmly, and we have all learned your methods well enough to continue the treatments while you rest for a few hours. But what if something goes wrong? What if I miss something important? Sarah's voice showed the strain of days without sleep. Dr. Yira appeared in the doorway carrying a datapad full of treatment notes. Dr. Chen, we have been watching and learning everything you do. Dr. Haranth has documented all your protocols. I have recorded your diagnostic methods, and Dr. Keth has mastered your family group arrangements. We can take care of them for a while. Sarah looked around at the alien doctors who had become her team. Over the past 4 days, they had transformed from specialists focused on single species to healers who understood the emotional needs of traumatized children. Regardless of their biology, you really think you can handle it? Sarah asked, her exhaustion finally showing through her determination. We learned from the best, Dr. Haranth said, entering the medical bay with his 4 arms full of equipment. Besides, the ship's AI has been monitoring your treatment patterns and can alert us if anything unusual happens. As if responding to its name, the ship's computer spoke in its calm, mechanical voice. Dr. Chen's treatment protocols have been integrated into my medical monitoring systems. Current patient status shows steady improvement across all recovery groups. No critical situations detected. Sarah managed a small smile. Even the computer has learned pack medicine. But before she could finally agree to rest, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors and the computer's voice echoed with urgency. Medical emergency in quarantine section 12. All medical staff report immediately. Sarah was on her feet and running before the announcement finished. Her exhaustion disappeared as adrenaline took over, and she reached quarantine section 12 ahead of the other doctors. Inside, she found chaos. 6 cubs from the newest family group were showing symptoms that none of them had seen before. Their breathing was rapid and shallow. Their skin color was changing, and their vital signs were fluctuating wildly. "It's a new strain," Dr. Heron said, arriving with his medical equipment. "The pathogen has adapted." Sarah's tired mind raced as she examined the sick cubs. This was her worst fear, that her methods had somehow made the disease stronger or allowed it to spread in new ways. "No," she said suddenly, studying the medical readings more carefully. "Look at the pattern. These symptoms aren't random." She pulled up comparative data from all the other cubs on her scanner. This isn't a new strain of the disease. This is the pathogen's last attempt to survive. It's attacking the cubs who are recovering the fastest. Dr. Keth looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The cubs who are healing emotionally are developing stronger immune systems," Sarah explained, her exhaustion forgotten as she focused on the crisis. "The pathogen is trying to overwhelm their defenses before they can completely fight it off." Sarah began calculating medication dosages in her head, but the numbers kept blurring together. Her hands shook as she tried to input data into her medical scanner. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Yura said quietly, "you need to slow down. You're making calculation errors." Sarah looked at her scanner and realized the young intern was right. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense, and she couldn't remember what she had been trying to calculate. I need to." Sarah's voice trailed off as the exhaustion hit her like a wave. Dr. Keth stepped forward and gently took the scanner from her hands. "Dr. Chen, we have been watching you work for 4 days. We know your methods. Tell us what needs to be done and we will do it." Sarah forced herself to think clearly despite her exhaustion. The cubs need increased immune support, but the dosages have to be calculated based on their emotional stress levels, not just their body weight. And they need comfort. This attack is happening because they're getting better, which means they're more scared of losing their progress. Dr. Haranth immediately began preparing medications while Dr. Yura checked emotional stress indicators on each cub. Dr. Keth moved to comfort the scared cubs, using the gentle approaches he had learned from watching Sarah. "What about dosage calculations?" Dr. Haranth asked. Sarah tried to focus on the numbers, but they kept swimming in her vision. The formula is..." She struggled to remember her own treatment protocols. "Dr. Chen," the ship's AI said suddenly, "I have been monitoring your treatment calculations for 4 days. Shall I provide the recommended dosages based on your established patterns?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "You learned my dosing methods? Your treatment approach follows consistent mathematical relationships between emotional stress, species biology, and medication effectiveness. I can calculate optimal dosages for each patient. Within minutes, the AI provided exact medication recommendations for each sick cub. Dr. Haranth administered the treatments while Dr. Keth and Dr. Yura provided emotional support and comfort." Sarah watched her team work, realizing that they had truly learned her methods. They moved between the cubs with confidence, adjusting treatments based on individual responses and providing the emotional care that was just as important as the medicine. "It's working," Dr. Yura reported an hour later. "All 6 cubs are stabilizing." Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair, watching her alien colleagues save lives using methods she had taught them. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Dr. Keth corrected. "You taught us that healing requires both science and heart. Now we can continue the work even when you rest." As the crisis passed and the cubs returned to stable condition, Sarah realized something important had happened. Her methods had spread beyond just her own work. The alien doctors had not only learned her techniques, but they had adapted them and made them their own. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Haranth said, approaching with a gentle but firm expression, "you have given us the tools we need to continue healing these cubs. Now you must trust us to use them while you take care of yourself." Sarah looked around at the medical bay where cubs from a dozen different species were recovering together, cared for by doctors who had learned to see beyond biological differences to emotional needs. "All right," she said finally. "But if anything changes, wake me up immediately." "We will," Dr. Yira promised. "But we think we can handle it now." As Sarah finally headed toward her quarters for some desperately needed sleep, she heard Dr. Keth explaining to a new medical staff member, "The key is understanding that every species needs comfort and family, even if they express it differently. Dr. Chen taught us that medicine without compassion is incomplete." Sarah smiled as she walked away, knowing that her pack was in good hands. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the main observation deck of Mercy's Hope, watching the final group of cubs play together in the ship's largest recovery area. All 200 cubs were now healthy, happy, and ready to return to their families, but the changes that had started with one exhausted human veterinarian had spread far beyond the quarantine ship. "Dr. Chen, the delegation from the Andorian Medical Council has arrived," announced Dr. Yira, who now wore the insignia of Assistant Chief Medical Officer. "They want to observe your integrated treatment methods before they implement them on their homeworld." Sarah turned from the window where cubs from 12 different species were playing games that no one species could have invented alone. A small Draconis was riding on the back of a gentle Thrikari, while 3 Corvin pups cheered them on. Velthian cubs were teaching Zentari infants how to groom properly, and everyone seemed to understand that the different purring sounds, chirps, and trills were all expressions of happiness. "How many medical delegations does that make this week?" Sarah asked. 17, Dr. Harenth replied, approaching with his usual collection of data pads. "The Galactic Health Authority wants to establish new protocols based on your methods. They're calling it Integrated Species Medicine, or ISM. Sarah smiled at the formal name they had given to what she simply thought of as treating the whole patient, not just their biology. "What do you think about that, Dr. Harenth?" The Centauri doctor's forearms gestured expressively. "I think it is about time the galaxy learned what Earth veterinarians have always known, that healing requires both science and compassion." Dr. Keth joined them at the observation window, his golden scales gleaming under the ship's lights. "Dr. Chen, I have news from Thrikari Prime. Our government wants to send 50 medical students to train under your methods. They want to learn what they call pack medicine. And I have similar requests from 6 other worlds," added Dr. Yira. "The University of Centauri wants to create an entire department focused on multi-species emotional healing." Sarah looked at her friends and colleagues. These alien doctors who had become so much more than just medical partners. They had become family, united by their shared commitment to healing all creatures regardless of their biology. "There's something I need to tell you all," Sarah said quietly. "The Galactic Health Authority has offered me a position as director of the new Interspecies Medical Academy. They want to build it on a space station near the galactic core, where doctors from all species can come to learn integrated treatment methods." Dr. Harenth's 4 eyes lit up with excitement. "Dr. Chen, that is wonderful news. You could teach thousands of doctors your methods, but—" Dr. Keth asked, sensing there was more to Sarah's announcement. Sarah smiled and gestured toward the playing cubs. "But I told them I could only accept if my entire team comes with me. What's the point of teaching integrated medicine if the teachers don't work as an integrated team?" Dr. Yira clapped her hands together. "You want all of us to help run the academy? I want you to help me create something that has never existed before," Sarah said. "A place where medical students from every species learn to work together from the beginning, where Thrikari doctors learn to understand Centauri emotional needs, where human veterinarians share knowledge with Corvin healers, where everyone learns that compassion is a universal language." The 3 alien doctors looked at each other, then back at Sarah. "When do we start?" Dr. Keth asked simply. Before Sarah could answer, Administrator Vex's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All medical staff to the main assembly area. We have special guests arriving." When they reached the main assembly area, Sarah gasped in surprise. The large space was filled with beings from dozens of different species. Some she recognized, others she had never seen before. At the front of the crowd stood families of cubs that had been treated on Mercy's Hope, now healthy and reunited with their parents. "Dr. Chen," Administrator Vex announced, "these families have traveled from across the galaxy to thank you for saving their children." A large Thrikari male stepped forward, his golden scales polished to a brilliant shine. Behind him stood the small Thrikari cub that Sarah remembered from the early days of treatment, now healthy and playful. Dr. Chen, the adult Thrakari said, his voice deep and formal, you saved my son's life. But more than that, you taught him that beings from different species can be family. He speaks constantly of his ship brothers and sisters from other worlds. The small cub broke away from his father and ran to Sarah, wrapping his arms around her legs in a hug that nearly knocked her over. Dr. Sarah, I missed you. Similar scenes played out across the assembly area as cubs reunited with Sarah and her medical team. Parents expressed gratitude in dozens of different languages, but the meaning was universal. Thank you for saving our children. But what moved Sarah most was watching the cubs themselves. They had maintained the bonds they formed during their recovery, greeting cubs from other species as true siblings. Their parents watched in amazement as their children played games, shared food, and communicated across species barriers as if they were the most natural things in the galaxy. Dr. Chen, said a soft voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a small Velthian female with silver fur, accompanied by two adults of the same species. I am Kira. You probably don't remember me, but you held my hand when I was scared. Sarah knelt down to the young Velthian's level. I remember you, Kira. You were very brave. I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up, Kira said seriously. I want to help sick children from all different species. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. I think you'll make a wonderful doctor, Kira. As the reunion celebration continued, Dr. Haranth approached Sarah with a special data pad. Dr. Chen, I have been tracking the long-term effects of your treatment methods. The cubs who recovered using integrated care show stronger immune systems, better social adjustment, and higher intelligence scores than cubs treated with traditional methods. More importantly, added Dr. Keth, they show no fear or prejudice toward other species. These cubs are growing up to see all beings as potential family. Sarah looked around the assembly area where cubs from 12 species were playing together, while their parents watched in wonder. Some of the adult beings were meeting for the first time, brought together by their children's shared experience. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, I think these cubs might be the first generation of truly galactic citizens. They don't see species differences as barriers. They see them as different ways to be family. Dr. Yira nodded enthusiastically, and when they grow up, they'll teach their own children the same thing. Dr. Chen, you haven't just changed medicine, you've started changing the galaxy. As the celebration wound down and families prepared to return to their homeworlds, Sarah found herself surrounded by her alien colleagues who had become her closest friends. So, Dr. Haranth said, are we ready to build an academy that will teach the galaxy how to heal with both science and heart? Sarah looked at each of her friends, Dr. Haranth with his four-armed enthusiasm, Dr. Keth with his fierce loyalty, and Dr. Yira with her brilliant mind and gentle spirit. I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with. There is one thing I want to add to the academy curriculum, Dr. Keth said seriously. What's that? Sarah asked. Dr. Keth smiled, showing his sharp Thrakari teeth in an expression that had once seemed frightening but now looked warm and friendly. A required course on the importance of rest. We cannot have our students working themselves to exhaustion the way someone we know did. Sarah laughed, the first truly relaxed laugh she had enjoyed in weeks. That's probably a good idea. As Mercy's Hope prepared to transport the cubs and their families back to their homeworlds, Sarah stood once more at the observation window. But now she wasn't watching 6 scared cubs in quarantine. She was watching healthy, happy children from a dozen species saying goodbye to each other, with promises to stay in touch and visit each other's worlds. Dr. Chen, Dr. Yira said, joining her at the window. What do you think will happen to them? Sarah watched as a small Draconis cub hugged a Zentori infant goodbye, both of them crying but promising to write letters to each other. I think they're going to change the galaxy, she said softly, one friendship at a time. Behind them, the ship's AI made an announcement. Attention all passengers. We are beginning our journey to return our young friends to their families. Estimated travel time to complete all drop-offs 14 days. 14 days, Dr. Haranth mused. Enough time to plan our new academy. Sarah smiled and picked up her ever-present medical scanner. Not to check on sick cubs this time, but to record the vital signs of healthy, happy children from across the galaxy. Let's get to work, she said. We have a lot of doctors to train. As Mercy's Hope began its journey through space, carrying its precious cargo of healed cubs and their families. Sarah Chen, the human veterinarian who had refused to rest, finally allowed herself to believe that sometimes the greatest medicine was simply refusing to let anyone suffer alone. The cubs were going home, but the family they had created together would last forever. By the second day, Sarah had been awake for 36 hours straight. Her eyes were red from staring at medical screens, and her hands shook slightly from too much stimulant drinks, but she refused to stop working. Every time she tried to rest, she could hear the soft cries of sick cubs echoing through the ship's corridors. Dr. Keth had become her most dedicated assistant, working alongside her to reorganize the quarantine areas. Together, they had created 6 mixed-species recovery groups based on compatibility and emotional needs, rather than biological categories. The results were remarkable, but they had also created a new problem. "Dr. Chen, Administrator Vex wants to see you immediately," announced Dr. Haranth, his blue skin even paler than usual. "The Galactic Health Authority is asking questions about our treatment protocols." Sarah looked up from the medical charts she was updating. "Are the cubs getting better?" "Yes, recovery rates are up 40%, but..." "Then they can wait," Sarah said firmly, turning back to her work. "I have 12 more cubs to evaluate before I can create the next compatibility group." Dr. Haranth's forearms gestured nervously. "You do not understand. They are threatening to remove you from the ship for violating quarantine procedures." Sarah finally stopped working and looked at the worried Centauri doctor. "Dr. Haranth, how many cubs have we lost since I started the group treatments?" "None," Dr. Haranth admitted quietly. "And how many were we losing before?" 2 or 3 per day." Sarah nodded and picked up her scanner again. "Then Administrator Vex can wait until I finish saving lives." Dr. Keth, who had been listening from across the medical bay, stepped forward. "I will speak to the administrator. Dr. Chen's methods are working better than anything we have tried." But when Administrator Vex arrived 30 minutes later with 2 security officers, Sarah could see that bureaucracy was about to clash with medical necessity. The tall Centauri official looked angry and worried at the same time. "Dr. Chen, you have violated 17 different quarantine protocols," Administrator Vex said, reading from a datapad. "You have mixed potentially infectious species, ignored isolation procedures, and refused to follow established medical guidelines." Sarah continued working while she talked, checking the vital signs of a young Corvin pup who was finally eating solid food again. "Have any of the cubs gotten worse since I started mixing species?" "That is not the point." "It's exactly the point," Sarah interrupted, finally turning to face the administrator. "Your protocols are designed to prevent the spread of disease, but this disease spreads through despair, not contact. Isolation makes it stronger, not weaker." Administrator Vex looked uncomfortable. "The rules exist for good reasons. We cannot simply ignore them because one doctor has an unusual theory." "It's not a theory anymore," said a new voice from the doorway. Dr. Yira, a young Centauri intern who had been helping Sarah, entered the room carrying a datapad full of medical readings. The numbers don't lie. Dr. Yira projected holographic charts into the air that showed recovery rates, survival statistics, and treatment effectiveness. Cubs in mixed species groups are recovering 3 times faster than cubs in isolation. Their immune systems are stronger, their stress levels are lower, and their response to medication is much better. Administrator Vex studied the data with growing amazement. "How is this possible?" Sarah walked over to a large window that looked into one of the new mixed species recovery areas. Inside, 8 cubs from 5 different species were resting together in a carefully arranged space that accommodated each species' needs. A large Thrakari cub served as a warm resting spot for 3 smaller cubs while 2 Velthians groomed each other's fur nearby. "Look at them," Sarah said softly. "Really look. That little Draconis there was dying 2 days ago. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond to treatment, barely breathed. Now she's playing with a Corvin pup and purring so loudly it's helping regulate everyone else's heart rate." As they watched, a new cub was brought into the recovery area, a small, scared Centauri infant who had just been stabilized after nearly dying. The other cubs immediately surrounded the newcomer, offering comfort in ways that their different biologies allowed. The large Thrakari moved closer to provide warmth, the Velthians began gentle grooming behaviors, and the Corvin pup shared his favorite toy. "They're creating their own family," Sarah continued. "That's what these cubs needed all along. Not just medicine, but the feeling that they belong somewhere safe. Dr. Yura added more data to the holographic display. The most interesting discovery is that cubs who recover in mixed groups develop stronger immune systems than cubs of the same species treated separately. It appears that exposure to different biological systems actually helps them fight the pathogen more effectively. Administrator Vex was quiet for a long moment, studying both the data and the cubs in the recovery area. This goes against everything we know about quarantine procedures. Maybe it's time to learn something new, suggested Dr. Keth, who had been watching the conversation carefully. Dr. Chen's approach is based on understanding behavior and emotion, not just biology. On Thrakari Prime, we have an old saying, "The pack that hunts together survives together." Perhaps healing works the same way. Sarah felt exhaustion hitting her again, but she forced herself to stay focused. Administrator, I understand your concerns about protocol, but these cubs have already survived the worst possible conditions on that smuggling ship. They've been exposed to each other's biology for weeks or months. Separating them now is causing more harm than good. What exactly are you proposing? Administrator Vex asked. Sarah pulled up her own datapad, showing treatment plans she had been working on throughout the night. I want to create 10 mixed species family groups based on emotional compatibility and mutual support needs. Each group will have medical monitoring specifically designed for multi-species treatment. We track everything. If any cub gets worse, we can immediately return to isolation protocols. Dr. Haranth stepped forward. I have been monitoring Dr. Chen's methods closely. The medical science is sound even if it is unconventional. It's not unconventional, Sarah corrected. It's just comprehensive. On Earth, we learned long ago that you can't separate physical health from emotional health. These cubs aren't just sick animals. They're traumatized children who need both medicine and love to heal. Administrator Vex looked around the room at all the medical staff who had gathered to listen. What do the rest of you think? Dr. Keth spoke first. I was skeptical, but the results speak for themselves. I have learned more about healing in 2 days working with Dr. Chen than in years of traditional practice. Dr. Yura nodded enthusiastically. The data supports everything Dr. Chen has proposed. This could revolutionize how we approach multi-species medical care. Even Dr. Haranth, usually cautious about breaking rules, agreed. If we can save more lives with these methods, we have a duty to try. Sarah watched Administrator Vex consider the situation. Through the window, she could see more cubs playing and comforting each other, their medical monitors showing steady improvements across all species. Very well, Administrator Vex said finally. You have 48 hours to prove this approach works on a larger scale. But I want constant monitoring, detailed records, and immediate reports if any cub shows signs of getting worse. Sarah nodded, already planning how to reorganize the remaining cubs into family groups. You won't regret this decision. I hope not, Administrator Vex said, because if this fails, it will be both of our careers. As the administrator and security officers left, Sarah turned to her team of alien doctors who had become believers in her methods. All right, everyone. We have 200 cubs to organize into loving families. Let's get to work. Dr. Keth placed a large scaled hand on Sarah's shoulder. Dr. Chen, you need to rest soon. You cannot help anyone if you collapse. Sarah looked at the Thrakari surgeon with tired but determined eyes. I'll rest when every cub is safe and healthy, not before. Then we better work fast, Dr. Yura said with a smile, because I don't think Dr. Chen knows how to sleep. As the medical team dispersed to begin the massive reorganization, Sarah allowed herself one small moment of hope. The cubs were getting better, the doctors were learning new ways to heal, and maybe, just maybe, they were creating something that would help sick and scared children across the galaxy for years to come. She picked up her scanner and headed toward the next group of cubs who needed her help. There was still so much work to do.